We're titling this Cherokee Ranch and Castle Foundation program The Royals and Other VIPs. You'll notice we're taking a few liberties with the term royals here, since in the U.S. we often seem to consider everyone from theatrical stars and artists to wealthy business executives as our royals. So welcome to the world of Mildred Montague Genevieve Kimball, known to her many friends as Tweet. Tweet was from a well-to-do family in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She was the only child of an Army colonel and a well-educated mother. They were in society circles, and Tweet was well educated as well. She attended Bryn Mawr College outside of Philadelphia, where she made many lifelong friends. Upon her return to Chattanooga, her Tennessee social life continued as she renewed old acquaintances and made new friendships. She was soon crowned Queen of the Cotton Ball in 1935.
She married Merritt Reddick, who was from another prominent family. Both families had many friends in the Army and Foreign Service, generals and ambassadors. When World War II broke out, Merritt enlisted, but he was known to General Magruder, who had heard his radio broadcast. The general had Merritt transferred to the intelligence staff of the OSS in Washington, D.C. He and Tweet spent several months in Washington, D.C., where they became friends with a number of British expatriates and led an active social life. Merritt was a quick study and was kept busy at work while Tweet was making connections.
Shortly after World War II, Merritt and Tweet were invited to attend a dinner in honor of Edward, the Duke of Windsor, and his wife Wallis Simpson in Washington, D.C. During the war, the Germans had been making overtures to the former King Edward VIII and the controversial Duchess. Upon the German victory over Great Britain, Edward would be returned to the throne with Wallis at his side.
Aware of these secret talks, Prime Minister Churchill appointed the Duke to be the acting governor of Bermuda in 1940. That would get the couple away from Europe, and Wallis was infuriated as she was not being given royal status. Edward finally resigned as governor in 1945, and the couple made plans to visit Washington, D.C. briefly before returning to Europe. Edward and Wallis had to be housed at the British Embassy, but the embassy had already been reserved. The ambassador was entertaining all the British Consul Generals of Canada and the U.S. at a large dinner party at the embassy. Lady Hester Wilson offered to host a small dinner party for their highnesses to avoid problems at the embassy. Major John Miller was Lord Wilson's age. Tweet and Major John Miller remained close friends, but more on this later.
Lord Halifax recognized that all the consul generals would be excited to be presented to the Duke and his Duchess. Halifax asked the Duke if he would return at 10 p.m. to meet the British Foreign Office guests. The Duke agreed.
As plans evolved, Lady Wilson called Tweet and said, "My dear, I want you and Merritt to attend our little dinner for the Duke and Duchess. You will be the youngest, and the lowest ranking, so you must be seated in the center of the table. Tell Merritt to be sure and bring some of his marvelous stories to amuse the Duke. Remember, you must arrive 1/2 hour before royalty is due. Continuing from Tweet's memoirs, before the honored guests arrived from the embassy, the ladies were murmuring among themselves as to whether they would curtsy to the Duchess. Of course they would curtsy with pleasure to the former Edward VIII, now Duke of Windsor. I felt strongly that it was a courtesy to my hostess to give the unpopular American Duchess the honor of a curtsy, and said I intended to do so. Hester gave me a grateful smile. Dede Wittermeyer and the wife of the Secretary of War, who had gone to school with the Duchess in her youth, vowed that they did not admire her and would not curtsy. When the royal couple entered the Wilson drawing room, handsomely announced by Major John Miller and warmly welcomed by Lady Hester, the Duke stepped back and let his wife lead the procession. Tweet made her curtsy, as did Mrs. Bradley, but not Dede Wittermeyer or Mrs. Royal. They shook hands with Wallace, and she was obviously displeased. The Duke was known to close friends and family as David, and Tweed said that at the dinner table every few minutes the Duchess would interrupt her conversation and call out loudly, "David, that is not the way it was," or "David, you remember I told you," etc. During these interruptions the whole table subsided and conversation lagged, although we all tried to keep it lively. The Duchess was wearing a startlingly chic Mainbacher gown of clinging black jersey with a high neckline in front and a very low back. Her neck was encircled with a necklace of enormous carved emeralds, with a large marquise emerald pendant hanging low on her bare back.
After dinner, Major John Miller approached the Duke and whispered that the car was at the door to take him to meet the consul generals at the embassy. He rose immediately and spoke to his wife. She seemed to wish to show her power and be uncooperative, at the expense of her host, the British ambassador, who was holding 150 guests to be presented to her. The fact was that the long training and discipline of the royal family had never entered Wallace Warfield's head. She was not going to make any considerate gesture in an official capacity. Who knows how she might have softened the royal attitude towards herself and her husband had she tried to play the official game.
Amazingly to me, the Duke immediately sat down again, and they did not depart for another half hour. Major John Miller could only call the embassy quietly and explain what was going on and why they would be late. This was a marvelous experience for Merritt and me, and it confirmed my opinion of the Duchess.
Merritt was recruited by the OSS, now the CIA, and he was deployed to the Court of St. James as an undersecretary working undercover. Tweet and their 2 adopted babies joined Merritt in London. They were fortunate to rent an Italian-style villa outside of London. The owner was pleased to rent it as he was still on gas and coal rationing, and since Merritt was with the American Embassy, they were not on rationing. The garden was 17 acres on a hill with descending terraces. As Tweet describes it, there was a hollow in the garden beyond the house where I had the chief gardener build a ladder to a tree house. The boys came to adore this house.
Tweet was in her element and began entertaining and loving it. As we understand it, she was very successful in this endeavor and eventually was asked to tone it down a bit as Merritt was working undercover. As the boys, Kirk and Richard, got older, they were invited to Buckingham Palace for a play day with Prince Charles, now King of England. Tweet tucked a few candies in their pocket to share with His Royal Highness. He respectfully declined as he wasn't allowed to eat sweets.
During their 6 years in London, Tweet and Merritt's marriage had deteriorated. Tweet determined she would divorce Merritt, and she wanted to be certain it was all accomplished to her satisfaction. This prompted Merritt's offer to buy her any home she wanted as long as it was west of the Mississippi. He didn't want all her cousins and friends in Tennessee to learn any details about their lives and his transgressions. She accepted the offer and found the ranch and castle a wonderful fit. She moved in with the boys, her mother, Bimsey, and servants in 1954.
Tweet wanted the boys to have good schools, a cattle ranch, and cultural activities, including the Arapaho Hunt Club. Her mother Bimsey's advice was, why go into cattle? If the economy goes flat, you have to feed the cattle. But if art doesn't sell, you don't have to feed it.
Before Tweet moved to the ranch, her mother presented her with a 3-week trip to the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, hoping it would be a good diversion from the family tensions. It was during this trip to England that Tweet purchased 2 sets of the complete works of Winston Churchill, one for Kirk and one for Richard. Years later, Tweet would attend President Ronald Reagan's second inaugural ball along with her friends Mark and Betty Cox. It gave her the opportunity to wear the diamond tiara that was given to her by Merritt's mother.
In 2008, this was sold off by Bonhams in a fine jewelry auction. The pear-shaped center diamond weighed 7.26 carats, and the remaining diamonds weighing approximately 25.70 carats. They were mounted in platinum and it sold for $700,000. Not too long after Tweet settled in at the castle, she hosted a party for the Central City Opera. Among the guests were Lily Pons, the famous Metropolitan Opera diva. At the party, Tweet had a request to host a wedding for actors Christopher Plummer and Tammy Grimes. She happily accepted. From Tweet's memoir, on the day of the wedding, Baron and Baroness Louis de Cabrol, then the French consul general, and his wife, dropped in at about 3 p.m. to call. I asked Louis to stay and give the bride away, knowing she would love that. He agreed. Louis was a very handsome man, a graduate of Saumur Cavalry School in France. He had been wounded by a dud bomb and had lost both his legs below the knee. He walked with 2 canes and had transferred to the French diplomatic service. His wife was an American doctor. Christopher and Tammy and the Wilkinsons arrived about sunset, so they chose the terrace, looking to the Rockies as the scene for their vows. While the marriage only lasted 5 years, Tweet's friendship with Christopher Plummer lasted the rest of their lives. While performing at the DCPA, he lunched with her at the castle a few months before she passed away in 1999. This photo was taken after the luncheon that Tweet and Christopher Plummer shared. This is the ring Tweet was wearing as she sat with Christopher Plummer after their luncheon. It was designed by Salvador Dali and it sold in 2008 for $30,000.
Tweet had been bridesmaid for Freddie Lincoln, her Bryn Mawr roommate. Freddie lived in Evergreen, and Tweet had spent time with her family there. She must have been aware that Freddie's family would provide an entree to Denver society. Tweet and Freddie visited Freddie's daughter Fritzie in Persia in the late 1970s. Fritzie had been teaching school there and ended up marrying one of the Shah's closest friends. They lived in a palace. Tweet shared her reading of the political situation in Persia, now Iran, and her concerns for Fritzie and her family in no uncertain terms. Tweet proposed that she and Freddie take Fritzie's jewelry back with them, and she advised Fritzie to send as many valuables and paintings back to Freddie's as she could. Freddie and Fritzie were in disbelief that any harm could come to them, and Freddie scolded Tweet for upsetting her daughter. Not long after that, the Islamic Revolution transpired. Fritzie and her husband Manisher left Iran with just the things they could carry with them.
In 1979, Tweet hosted a cocktail party for the Duke of Argyll, Ian Campbell. You may be familiar with his story from the recent Amazon BBC miniseries, A Very British Scandal. The party was a fundraiser for the restoration of his ancestral home, Inverary Castle, which had been heavily damaged in a fire. I believe the prices will be an inflation shock. Tweet Kimball requests the pleasure of your company at a subscription benefit cocktail party, 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m., Sunday, April 22nd, 1979, Cherokee Ranch, to contribute to the restoration of the burned Inverary Castle, and to meet His Grace the Duke of Argyll, Admiral of the Western Isles, Master of Her Majesty's Household in Scotland, guest of Mr. and Mrs. Colin James. RSVP $10 per guest, must be mailed in advance. Present this invitation at the gate. Phone 303-688-4600, map below. Regrettably, space is limited. After the first 100 reservations are received, your money will be returned. The party was $7 per person for the canapes, and then the $10 for the restoration donation. Tweet was on the committee for the 6-day-long British Fair in 1982. Knowing they couldn't just ring up Buckingham Palace to invite a royal to come to their fair, Tweet was the go-to person with the right connections. Her longtime friend, Sir John Miller, equerry to the Queen, responded by saying that Queen Elizabeth's daughter, Her Royal Highness the Princess Anne, would attend. Tweet would host a dinner party, however, she would not host Her Royal Highness and her entourage overnight, as she did not have a staff capable of taking care of the royal needs. Princess Anne and her entourage stayed with the Vernon Taylors in their lovely home in Thraymore.
A protocol officer was sent out prior to her visit to give all those entertaining Her Royal Highness the ground rules and to check menus for duplicate entrees, etc. The list of rules included: no one could arrive after her entourage, no one could depart before Her Royal Highness. At the dinner table, she must be served by men wearing white gloves, no skin showing below the neck. Table flatware setting had to be 12 inches between the knife and the fork, and the course began when she picked up her fork and ended when she put it down. She rushed no one. This last item made it easy to determine when a course could be cleared.
The invitation mentions miniatures. These are half-sized replicas of the medals men have received, and they are worn on their breast pocket. As word of the event got out, Tweet's phone rang off the hook with friends wanting to be included. After weeks of preparation, the day of the party arrived. We had the British Secret Service, the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, a helicopter, plus a fire engine and all the chauffeurs ready for any eventuality. Prior to the arrival of the motorcade, we needed to call on the electrician Tweet had used to enhance the lighting on various paintings. Thank goodness Wayne Russert was there. As we plugged in our equipment at the kitchen, the dining room lights went out. Wayne was on his third attempt to fix them, and we were pulling out candles. Then success. Whew, all was light.
Tweet had a pasture along the 2-mile road to the castle, fenced, so Her Royal Highness could enjoy a view of some of her finest Santa Gertrudis cattle. She also arranged to have people waving small British flags along the route. Royals must be served seated at a table. That limited those being seated with Her Royal Highness to 12. All 65 of the other guests were served in the Great Hall. The plates were served filled, along with forks, napkins, and wine. Then they were collected and dessert was passed. Finally, all was removed and champagne for a toast was provided. Concerned that clearing the dishes on the table would entail clatter, Tweet had the ranch hands build a padded plywood cover for the pantry sink. All was quiet.
One of our family and friends' favorite stories of serving Princess Anne is that of the forgotten veal. Tweet and I had devised a menu that did not require a knife for the guests in the Great Hall. The entree was veal in a sauce with mushrooms and artichoke hearts. The veal for the Great Hall guests was cut into bite-sized pieces, while the dining room guests had the full slices of the veal. As we started the dinner preparations, the veal for the dining room guests could not be found. It had never been loaded and was back at our home kitchen. I frantically called our good friend and neighbor Marilyn Carroll, despite knowing that she had a sprained ankle and could not drive. The blessing was that her son Craig and his girlfriend were there, and they were able to find the meat and drive it down to the castle. They arrived right after the royal party and were driving the road lined with flag wavers and Craig's clunky old Ford Capri. The day was saved. In the dining room, we served 5 courses. At the end of the evening, I tried to recall the number of items each guest had required. glasses, flatware, plates, napkins, etc. It amounted to 22 items per person. Tweet thought long and hard about the right guests to provide good conversation in the dining room. Later, it was learned that one of the topics over dinner was acquiring and caring for the bull seamen. Several years later, we also served Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra, the Queen's first cousin, and her husband, Sir Angus Ogilvy. The party for Her Royal Highness Princess Anne was by far our most challenging, but all the royals were very gracious. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands was a guest for lunch. He and Tweet were both active in the World Wildlife Fund, and on the occasion of Tweet's 80th birthday celebration, he sent his sincere regrets in several personal notes.
We had quite a challenge when the Crown Prince of Nepal and his entourage attended dinner. There were 20 guests, and all had to be served seated. We had 12 in the dining room and the other 8 at a table near the dining room doors in the Great Hall. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Garenda and his entourage were on a World Wildlife Fund tour for the United States, stopping at Tweet since she was a supporter of the organization. What a beautiful and handsome group. The women were all in gorgeous silk saris and the men in beautiful suits. As they toured the country, the Henry Kissingers entertained them in New York, and the Hunts hosted them in Chicago. At the King Ranch in Texas, they were served a barbecue, but the barbecue sauce and silk saris were not compatible. As the group entered the castle, John, as the butler, greeted them and read their eyes. They were very cautious about being on another ranch. John felt they needed encouragement to loosen up and enjoy the party. An opportunity arose when he was at the bar, and he asked one of the ladies if she had met his friends Jim and Louis Whitaker. Jim was famous for being the first American to summit Mount Everest in Nepal. She was thrilled and said, "Oh, Louis!" And the ice was broken, and she decided she should have a double drink. Others quickly followed with doubles. As the cocktail hour progressed, the governor of Colorado said to the prince, "Do you have mountains in Nepal?" Without missing a beat, the prince replied, "Oh yes, our mountains are 28,000 feet high, and yours are 14,000 feet high." John almost dropped the tray of drinks. The dinner turned out to be a great success, and the prince's parties sent a thank you note to Tweet saying it was the best party of their trip.
Some of the Colorado governors we know that Tweet entertained were Roy Romer, Bill Owens, and Richard Lamb. We've already mentioned Sir John Miller, KCVO, DSO, MC from England. He was a crown equerry to Queen Elizabeth II, in charge of her horses. Sir John and Tweet were friends for over 50 years and spent time with each other in England and at Cherokee Ranch. On one of his visits, Tweet held a dinner party to celebrate their 50 years of friendship. On Tweet's last visit to England with Betty Cox, Sir John drove them through the streets of his village in a horse-drawn carriage, stopping all the traffic. They were thrilled. The raccoons were fed on the terrace every night. They appeared after the dinner party, soon to be followed by the skunks. They were our garbage disposal. Tweet described them as well behaved and that proved true until the babies came with them. They hadn't learned their manners yet. Their tails went up when John went to put out the food on the table scraps, and he had to rush to safety in the far door. After the skunks suddenly left the terrace, we realized a big black bear had just emerged from hibernation. He was hungry and he smelled the food. Climbing the stairs to the terrace, he laid down on the food and shoveled it in. Tweet asked Sir John if he wanted to see the bear. He declined, saying he was quite comfortable by the fireplace. The bear left when John banged a metal spoon on a metal pan. Too noisy.
Tweet entertained several ambassadors. This is the Australian ambassador, Dalrymple, who attended a party. Tweet also entertained Leslie Oldfield, the mayor of Alice Springs, Australia, a fun lady. Serving the ambassador from China proved to be a bit nerve-wracking, as once Tweet ordered rice as a part of the dinner menu. John knew he would have to cook it perfectly. The Yugoslavian ambassador was pleased to spot an icon of St. George during his visit, and he translated the Serbian writing that was on the icon. Winthrop Rockefeller came to Denver annually for the stock show and always visited Cherokee, as he also raised Santa Gertrudis cattle on his Winrock ranch. Rockefeller's pilot was also his bodyguard, and he kept his Uzi machine gun under his chair. John noticed that the fire needed wood, and he headed out for some. Mr. Rockefeller said he'd like to help, as he didn't get to do that on his ranch. John got an okay nod from the bodyguard.
The artist Douglas Johnson did beautiful pastels of Tweet and her family. He lived in Paris and Sri Lanka. Sedalia artist Bill Duncan lived on a neighboring ranch and knew Tweet from the age of 12. He said she always encouraged him as an artist, and some of his bronze sculptures can be seen in the castle. Another sculpture at the castle is a bust of Mary Caroline Wilson Allen, skillfully sculpted by Tweet's grandmother, Carolyn Davis Wilson. One dinner party featured Milton Friedman, the well-known economist from the University of Chicago, as a special guest. During the dinner, he was asked about the national debt, which was a hot topic in the news at that time. On the way home, John assured me that all was well. Mr. Friedman had solved the national debt over dinner. I think we need him now.
Rath Falk was a close and longtime friend of Tweet. He owned the Pine Cliff Ranch on Highway 105. His family in upstate New York was involved in the building of the Erie Canal and was later influential at Corning Glass, where Rath's father was president. Steuben Crystal was a division of Corning. Tweet and Rath both had several pieces of Steuben in their dining rooms, and they also shared hosting duties at money fundraising events and were both members of the Arapaho Hunt. Catering for Rath was always a challenge, as he wanted the dessert for the sit-down dinner served in green Steuben glass goblets. Steuben hadn't produced any colored glass in years, and they were irreplaceable. As John carried them into the dining room, they would wobble on the plates. It was a huge relief, when the goblets were safely put away. Dan Witchy was quite influential in helping DU, Denver University, make it through the financial downturn of the 1980s. He served as chancellor from 1989 to 2005. He also came to Tweet's rescue to help save the castle and Cherokee Ranch. Tweet was getting discouraged in her efforts to save Cherokee for the future generations to enjoy. She had a vision of preserving the land as open space and as a sanctuary for wildlife. At one of the foundation board meetings, Dan said that the plan they had in mind might not work out, but they would keep trying until they found a solution. This lifted Tweet's spirits and they moved forward. Quoting Dan, "She had a great dream, which was to take the property she could have sold for $50 million and turned it into a permanent legacy for the people of Colorado."
Many other people contributed to the preservation of Cherokee Ranch and Castle Foundation. Stan Lewandowski, head of IREA, Paul Grenny, Angela Overy, John Calkins, this is his photo, and Ed Tepe, plus many other dear friends. What would a program on Tweet's royals and VIP contacts be without a mention of her passionate love and her own royals, the Santa Gertrudis bulls and cattle? Kirk related about when Minotaur, one of her very favorite bulls, passed. Tweet was out of town, and knowing how distraught she would be, he wanted to bury him before her return. He had the grave dug out, but as fate would have it, rigor mortis had set in by the time all was ready. Minotaur was stiff as a board, and his feet were totally straight, his legs, and he was just stiff. He wouldn't fit in the grave. Oh, it was terrible. So, more excavating. Upon Tweet's return, she put her friend, an artist friend, Bill Duncan, to work designing a bronze plaque to be mounted on a large stone at the burial site. It also became the resting site of several of her favorite animals. This is the plaque Bill Duncan cast. It is on a large boulder halfway up Deer Trail Road and on the way to the castle.
During a recent visit to Australia, Mrs. Tweet Kimball, Cherokee Ranch, Sedalia, Colorado, USA, renewed an acquaintance with Cherokee Kent at the Cinnamon family property Dingyara Dugalawa. Tweet is the owner of Cherokee Ranch, which has a long history with SGBI. Cherokee Kent now is in his 18th year, was purchased by Ron Cinnamon during a visit to Cherokee Ranch in 1982. Tweet has been a most generous host to many Australians owners over the years, and the bloodlines from her stud are seen throughout the breed in Australia as well as many other overseas nations. During this visit, Tweet called out to the bull, and he recognized her voice after all these years. He was a huge bull, weighing approximately 2,500 pounds. Some bet.
Upon Tweet's death, the Douglas County News Press wrote this editorial. It's hard to find words to describe Mrs. Kimball. Crusty but sophisticated, blunt but diplomatic, charming but a little distant, very intelligent but down to earth. But her legacy is even deeper. She was one of a kind. She embodied grace, independence, the pioneer spirit, diplomacy, and the power of the free spirit.
Our time with Tweet was unforgettable, exciting, hard work, challenging. We felt fortunate if we got out of the castle by midnight. Once again, we've run out of time, but not out of stories. We thank you for coming, and we look forward to your taking your questions.